What's up, friends? Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forest. This week, I wanted to give you sort of like a behind the scenes on the Spores album, which just came out in full on the new moon here, October 16th, 2020. And I wanted to tell you, it's a very unique as far as how albums are made, how that one was made. And also just kind of tell you not just how it was made musically, but how it was sort of made energetically. But first, I just want to let you know that we're going to be doing a live stream event with Envelop SF. That's Christopher Willett's space, where he's going to do a spatial remix of the Spores album. You can tune in and listen to that with me in real time. Then afterwards, we're going to join in conversation, do a little Q&A, go deeper into this record and your experience with it. So that's on November 1st. So if you want to join in, you have to get a ticket, but it's super duper affordable. Check those out, eastforest.org. You can grab a ticket and learn more about the event. It's sort of the Spores virtual release, spatial remix with Envelop SF on November 1st. So about how this record was made. Some of you probably have heard me say this word like ceremony concert or ceremony album, and like, well, what does that mean? And it can mean different things, but in this instance, Spores is a part of the Music for Mushrooms, a soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner album. It's essentially excerpts from that album. And the Music for Mushrooms album, like several other of my other albums, are live improvised recordings from medicine ceremonies, psilocybin therapeutic ceremonies. And that's a big thing for me to say because for many years I didn't want to say that. I was, it's not something that is condoned in society. And so we had to keep some protections, and we still do. But essentially you're just trying to help someone through these journeys, and I'm playing the music. So that's my role. And the music is the guide to guide people through that experience. And my interest along with the folks who are hosting this is how can we create an experience that's the most positive, safe, gentle but powerful, really deeply meaningful experience for people. And music is the central guide, as it has been in other ceremonies for millennia. Music is the vehicle of the ceremony. In many ways, it is the ceremony. So anyway, this all started 12, 13 years ago when I was in New York City and just starting to have my own spiritual awakenings of sorts, like a reawakening out of my adolescence into, I don't want to say adulthood, because if anything, it's like a sloughing off of certain beliefs and ideas and preconceptions. But things were like breaking down. It was the Occupy Wall Street time, the financial collapse. I've always been a musician, but I had a photography job. That was sort of my day job, and it was a pretty sweet gig. People essentially came over to my place, and I'd take portraits. But even that was starting to wane because it was very much tied to the economy. And so things were breaking down. And often when things break down, there's doorways of opportunity. There's doorways for you to walk through. And I see this now, okay? And that's why we often, great change or meaningful change in our lives comes from collapse. Or maybe if that feels like a pejorative word, perhaps you could say meaningful change comes from newness being able to emerge. And the way things work in nature, in this world that we've incarnated into, you have to burn the fields. You have to, there has to be death for birth. Life being ever present, but it's in motion. It's in creation. So things were falling apart, and I was exploring, and I was having sort of my own collapse internally that I was recognizing, and there were these invitations popping up. And I had experiences with psilocybin in my life here and there, starting my first one in college, that were profound and meaningful, but I had no elders, I had no understanding of what those experiences were. But they were really valuable and important to me on a just sort of a gut level and a heart level. Like I had experienced stuff that felt like truer than true, realer than real in a sense. And so I was invited to my first ayahuasca ceremony with these Peruvian shamans who were the real deal, didn't speak English. They were bringing up the medicine as it's in their lineage that has been done that way for thousands of years. And I was terrified to go, absolutely terrified. And a friend of mine invited me up, and long story short, eventually I said yes, and I prepared, I meditated every day for a few months and did the full dieta preparation to clean out myself physically and emotionally and mentally before, and had a very, very powerful experience. And I started to explore music and ceremony and other ceremonies as well, whether it was a Lakota sweat lodge, or later I had experiences in Peru at Machu Picchu with San Pedro, which is an incredible story in itself, and other experiences. And learning about how what we know in sound science, talking to my friends like Alexander Tanous, who's been on the podcast, if you want to go back in time, if you want to go deep into the music and sound healing rabbit hole. But I wanted to combine sort of what I was picking up from indigenous knowledge and use of sound and music in ceremonial space with medicine, and then what we know from the science, like what we've learned. And I was just pulling all this into my brain, into my psyche, and started to make music. And because the things I was working on, the band I was in that I was pushing so hard, it just wasn't working, right? And everything, there was just all these doorways of time and opportunity. And I decided to start making music just for me that I could use with psilocybin, potentially, or at least that's what inspired it. Music that would be introspective, and it would start to touch, like a feeling of it would touch on the feeling that I had felt before in those ineffable, ethereal spaces. And that's the best way I can describe it. Like, there was just a particular feeling that I was chasing. And so I would sit in my bedroom in Brooklyn, that was underneath the Manhattan Bridge, and the train would go by every few minutes. And if I was recording anything on like a microphone, I'd have to stop. I even built these like crazy, like the building was an old factory, so that the walls were like a foot thick of brick, but nonetheless, I mean, this thundering train would kind of vibrate the building. And I built these like window type plug things, these like super heavy plywood and I bought this acoustical foam that kind of like slid into the window and you'd lock it in. And it did dampen the noise, but it also like made it pitch black. Like, couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And it made it very hot. You couldn't run your AC or anything like that. So I remember one night I left him in and I couldn't get up in the morning. I didn't know like what day it was or what time, because it's like sensory deprivation chamber. Anyway, it was an interesting way to record. But I didn't have any plan with the music other than it was a tool for myself. I thought I knew in my heart, I was like, this is definitely not commercial. I wouldn't even know what genre to call it. No one's going to be interested in it. It's largely instrumental. I think it's great music, but I didn't have like this agenda of like, and then I'm going to take this and make a career out of it and be talking about it 12, 13 years later. But I did this on my own time, really over about a year, and I was really enjoying it. I was really, really enjoying it. And like one of the first songs I wrote was 10 Laws. And I remember playing around with that. I have a podcast called The Story of 10 Laws, and you can hear about the actual creation of that song, but I was just chasing that feeling. I was like, oh, there it is. That chord progression gives me that feeling. Okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? But it was 10 Laws, a song called The Simple Things, and what became Pacific Coast Highway on my first record. And those are the first three. And I just built from there. And I had a very powerful experience a year later because mushrooms and psilocybin had just inspired this. I thought I would end the process by having a little ceremony myself, just myself in my bedroom, where I would imbibe a little bit of mushrooms intentionally and then listen to the record. And doing that utterly changed my life. Like, there's sort of before that and there was after that. Because what had happened was, it was as if as I like to describe it, my soul had tricked my ego into making this musical tool over an entire year without realizing what I was doing, that I was going to use in that one moment with this medicine. And the depth of the experience was doing something in my unconscious and in my psyche and in my heart and in my whole being that was this necessary happening to help me kind of cross a Rubicon into the new stage of my life. And I really, really felt like it was before and after. It was the middle of September, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. So anyway, at the end of all this, long story short, to tell you how the Spores album came to be, I had this album called The Education of the Individual Soul, and I put it out, and it was like free. I put it on the Internet Archive. I was like, this is a gift, because it's so powerful for me. I was like, how could I ever like use this, quote unquote, for anything other than what I thought was a pure good? And I wanted it to just be available. It's still free to download on my website. And I still it's under the Creative Commons license as far as non-commercial use. And so when I went to that first ayahuasca ceremony, this album, I had it, and I gave it to someone that I met at this ceremony. And I won't say his name just to protect his identity, but he's become one of my best friends. He became my first manager because I needed help, and he just wanted to help, and he always just wanted to help. And at first, he just kind of took the album. He didn't think much of it. But like months later, I heard from him, and he eventually did listen to it, and he eventually became obsessed with it and listened to it hundreds and hundreds of times while he was on the subway and going to work and traveling in New York City. And he had the idea, he's like, we are going to set up a small group of people, and you're going to do this essentially live, and we'll use the record, and people will listen to it on headphones to guide a journey, a psilocybin journey. And I'm like, it's like, bro, I don't know how to do that. That seems really crazy. And he's just one of these guys who's always pushed me into doing things, or should I say encouraged, but just done it. Just sort of like open the door, put on the parachute, and kick you out. And he set it up, and we went upstate, and there were 6 people. And I set up my little keyboard, my little looping station, and I did my best from the little bit I knew to just guide people through. And I learned a lot, because there are a lot of things that were sort of challenging. Like I remember certain, shall we call them guidelines or protocols we came up with over the years that I didn't have back then. And we just learned this by doing it anecdotally. And some of them are quite simple. Like we had 4 agreements. One of them was no technology. And that's because back then, like one of the guys, you get into an altered state, was playing with his camera and like taking pictures, and it was very distracting. And he obviously was using that as a kind of distraction from really diving in. So that's something that came out of that. And one of the other guidelines was we'll start together and we'll finish together. So that means, look, you can be an adult. If you need to leave, come back, that's fine. But you can't, we're not here to bail just because it's difficult or you're uncomfortable. Because somebody bailed. They just sort of left in the middle of it, and they never came back. And that was distracting too, and disconcerting, and sort of holding that container didn't really happen. The other ones that we eventually came up with was to respect the silence, meaning like honoring that the lack of talking, and if you're moving around the room a lot, that's very difficult to other people in their experience, so we're going to do that. And the other one is to protect your personal space. So it's not to turn into like a cuddle puddle and that kind of thing. It's like, no, you're here to do your work. It's a group experience, but you're kind of here to, those are all in a way crutches in essence. Like, even holding someone's hand, which is okay when you need help, of course. But again, these aren't hard rules. They're just guidelines. So we did the ceremony, and I recorded it. I just put a little like Zoom recorder like on the floor, recording the room sound. So really basic. And I have that recording. I'm going to play you a little bit of it because you're going to hear some of the evolution of where things went. So what I'm playing through, just so you know, the real rudimentary gear is it's a Nord keyboard. I'm sitting down. I think I had like an Akai Headrush looper. This is like a mono looper where you can just put just one loop basically. And I might have had like what's it called? Electro Harmonix reverb, and maybe delay pedal that I was plugging everything through that could turn on or off. That might have been it, and a couple like little percussion-y things. And I was really just in the very early stages of figuring out how to do looping, because when I'd done the education of the Individual Soul album that was in the studio, and I'm now looping live as a way to figure out how to recreate it, right? And that's not something I'd done, so it's really fresh for me. But you'll hear kind of I wanted to help you connect the dots from like where it began to where it ended up. So first, we're just going to hear a sampling of some of that recording from the very first improvised live ceremony. Actually, you can hear little elements there of Water Sign mixed in with a song called Choice. These are, I guess, ideas that were percolating at the time. And that's how it began. And then he kept organizing more of these. And I kept stepping up to the plate to the best I could and learning over the years, like what works and what doesn't work, and creating a musical language and lexicon through this process. And several years later, I kept recording them, but I started recording them just DI from the mixer I was plugging into. And probably 3, 4, 5 years later, something like that, I decided to release a couple of like these recordings, but kind of edited down just some of the like ideas that came up. And those became the albums Crystal Starship, Prana, Portlanders, Music to Die To, Music to Be Born To. These are all from the ceremonies. And initially, when I released them, I was really nervous because it's like, well, they're really different than the studio album that people were resonating with, this Education of the Individual Soul album. Because I thought this is more like, it's longer form, it's kind of ambient, it takes a while to build. And I frankly thought no one would be interested in it. But I decided to release it anyway, and that's what those records were. But I noticed there was a resonance with some people. And it gave me a little more confidence to release more of them, but I never really said how they were made or what they were from, in essence. And you fast forward all the way to 2018 or 19, I think it was 18. And I hadn't done a few ceremonies in a few years because I went through a divorce and I took a break from a couple years, and I wanted to not be like, quote unquote, the wounded healer. I was like, I knew I had some work to do on myself, and I didn't want to be stepping up in that way and potentially not in my full strength. I just felt I needed to step back. But eventually I was getting that invitation to come back and to do it again. And I started to feel like I think it's important, because it's important too for me to not be completely removed and divorced from this ceremonial space, because I recognize that it's my roots, and it's the roots of East Forest, and there's a kind of watering of my own creativity. This is a big part of that tree, and staying connected to it feels not only valuable and in an honor of like being in service, but it feels like a creative well. And I recognize that too. And so I was scared. These are never easy things to do. They're really the hardest thing I have to do, period. Because I'm not in control. Not that you ever are, but you really aren't in control in this. You're just sort of guiding a ship, and I don't control the storms. I just point the way. So we decided to do one, and I came back, and it had been a few years. So I was nervous and feeling like, okay, let's get back on the saddle here, and recorded a weekend. So it's usually a Friday night and a Saturday night, so 2 nights, and it goes about 4 to 6 hours each night of playing. And when that was done, I took it home, and those recordings were what became the Music for Mushrooms, a soundtrack for the Psychedelic Practitioner album. And the reason that album has such a word full of words in your mouth when you say it is because I wanted to, this time, I was like, you know what? I want to say what this is. And not only just say what it is, say what it's for, and start talking about how it can be used and how it's made. That's really the intention of me saying all this right now. And it was a real tool. And so it's like, I don't want to just release excerpts of it anymore. I want to release the whole thing, which I really thought very few people would be interested in. It was like a 5-hour album of 30-minute songs. Like this is, but I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I just felt the calling. And so that's what that album, why it was released that way. But you're asking now, why did I then make the Spores album, which is like excerpts from it, as I'd done in the past? Well, I came down here to southern Utah in one winter in February to finish the mixing on the Music for Mushrooms record. And it's not much you can mix because it's just a stereo track. But what I essentially mastering it, I wanted to run it through the API console here, sweeten it up a little bit, do some EQ, and the rest of the like mastering and EQing and like tape emulation and that sort of stuff was done in the box, in the computer. So I did that, and it's done in real time, so it took a long time, but I had a little extra time, and it was February, and there was this huge snowstorm. Like, I couldn't even get to my place that I know where I live in town, and so a friend of mine let me stay in their place that you could get to. It's like this little modular home, and there were probably 4 feet of snow outside, huge storm. I had my dog Kaya with me, and I still was here another week or something. And I remember sitting in the living room of this modular home thinking like, look, I could make an edited version of this and maybe fit it on a vinyl. That was my real interest. Or I could not, but that was sort of that lazy part of me thinking like, it's just because it's a lot of work. And usually the German half of me will step in and be like, well, then just do the work. So I ended up just working on it, seeing if it was possible. Like, what would it be like if I tried taking this Music for Mushrooms album and truncating it down? Would it still hold the essence? And after it was done, I noticed that it probably would barely fit on a vinyl if I could find someone to cut a longer vinyl, which I found. Shout out to Dietrich's and Kindercore vinyl. And that's what became the Spores record. So I've been holding it for a while, for boring business reasons, but eventually I was again just like, let's just get this out. I want to get it out. It's like a useful tool. And a little side note, my partner Rada started guiding ketamine therapy in Boise, Idaho at the Ketamine Therapy Clinic, which is totally legal and a very fast-growing field. But again, there's not a lot of guidance and experience or research about the music side of things. And she's been using the Spores album in guiding to help guide a ketamine therapy session. And it's been working wonderfully because it's about the right time. The album, I think, is just under an hour. And so it turns out it's not just music for mushrooms. Apparently it's music for ketamine, but that was unintentional. And you know what? It's music for your heart. It's music for relaxing. It's music for connecting. It's music for you. There's no wrong way to step into this experience. It's whatever feels right to you. And that's been my overall intention with all this stuff. I talk about the ceremonies and how things began mostly as a way to re-educate and demystify and to say, like, it's universal. It doesn't matter if you take a psychedelic or not. It's like, it's just about shutting off certain things on the outside and opening up the inside. And I just want to make music that helps guide you through that and helps guide you into that. So I wanted to create a bridge between people maybe who feel that that's a very comfortable space that they want and know about versus people who are afraid of it or judging it it's like, it's okay, because we're all just human beings. We all have the ability to resonate with music, and we all have an interior life. We're all the protagonist in our great journey. All of us have this epic show that we're in, that we are the star of the show, the movie of your life, as Krishna Das likes to say. And we're really just trying to step back from that show and that movie at times. I mean, the more often, the better, so that you're not lost in the gyrations of the timeline and the plot twists and the new characters that come in. You can step back and sort of see it all. And in doing that, that's like the seat of the soul, that Ram Dass likes to say, the witness that you can sit in and watch the show go by. You're not going to necessarily change the show, but you're less identified and lost inside it. And music can be a great tool to help us awaken. And I think I would argue, I would posit that we do this all the time. We're already doing it. It's like we're just not bringing a lot of consciousness to the way we're using music to shift our consciousness. And some music, in some of the music that I make like this, was very, very intentional in its purpose. And in that sense, and especially the room it was created in, and the energy, frankly, like the environment that it was created in, imbibes it with a special juju, I feel. And that's why I haven't made the same kind of record, like in the studio in the same way, like just being like, I'll just improvise with the same setup in the studio. I feel like it may be interesting, but it might not have the same soul to it. Because at best, in those ceremonies, I'm getting out of the way, and something larger than just my little me, that protagonist, is coming through. And it comes in waves, but that's what I feel like I'm stepping up for. And it's a conversation with that larger energy, myself and the people in the room, and what they're giving energetically, and how they're letting go, and how they're opening, and how we're all sort of riding this collective waves, and how they coincide, and how they dissipate and come together, and so forth. So I'm going to play you a little bit from the album Spores to give you a sense of the comparison to that very first ceremony, like over a decade before. And I'll play two samples. One is a song called Accord, and that's because there was a harmonium in the room that wasn't mine. It was someone who had one there, and I said, hey, could I just put this in the room and maybe I'll use it? I don't have a lot of experience with harmoniums. It's funny that like a pump organ instrument has become synonymous with India and Indian music. It's like I think it's an old British instrument. It's like a Western instrument, but nonetheless, it was there, and I felt called to use it in the ceremony. So I took my vocal microphone and just put it on the top where the sort of the reeds resonate, and there's the gated thing on the top where the sound comes out. And I was playing it, and I just leaned over and sang into the mic at the same time. So it was just one mic going through this system. It's kind of an awkward way to play and sing, but in some ways, like that constraint of having to like bend over and be in this strange position created a kind of tension that, you think less. It's a limitation, and limitations can be really good sometimes. And then afterwards, all I did was just try to like EQ it and sweeten it up just to make it sound nice and warm and not like harsh. Sometimes those pump organs can get a little like resonant in the mids there. And then there's also a track, I'll play a little bit of the one Always that I've played before on the podcast. I love this. This was one of those where it's like, wow, I really felt like I was surfing a sweet wave. And the best thing you can do in those moments is to not try and hold on to it too much. But I started with a kalimba, a thumb, one of those plucky things, dung, dung, dung. I've got it right, one of these. Right here, like this. I don't know if it was that one, but I don't think it is. But I had one, and I started looping that and creating sort of a plucky pad with that, and then was using a Wurlitzer off the Nord, which is, I've really been getting into the Wurlitzer sound the last few years. It's just such a wonderful, analog-y, rich, but also has a nice attack to it. and created that initial sort of chord bass line came through, which had a wonderful kind of round energy to it. And then the melody felt really classic, and it just came out. I was like, oh my God, I love this little hook. And I was just sort of exploring that hook in the song. And then there was that tension of the field recording of some of the jungle insects and weather kind of growing. And I think there's another drone, kind of like a harmonium that comes in that's sort of holding this tension in the background like a glue. And eventually it kind of goes away. And then it comes back. So there's a release and a pull. And that's another like musical technique I just found that over the years in the ceremonies, there's another thing I had in my kind of toolkit of what helps guide these journeys is you're creating rooms and sonic architecture, and many, many things help that. And one of them is sort of an on and an off, a tug and a pull, a tension and a release, essentially, which is an old musical idea, but it works really well to create movement. And there's all these wonderful ways that you can do that. So that's a bit of how the Spores album came to be. It's sort of a longer story to say it started 12 years ago from some early explorations, was built in these underground sound healing ceremony rooms, and gestated over the many years, combining that with all the other kinds of performance and recording. And, you know, it's the same constituent parts. Like I got better loopers. I use boomerang loopers. So it has 4 loops, and it's stereo, and it's in 24-bit. But the Nord's the same, and my microphones were better. And the effects is still just reverb and delay, but it's coming out of Ableton is doing the effects as opposed to a pedal. So it's not a huge difference, but it's really the same colors I'm painting with. Maybe they're just a little richer colors in a sense. And you can hear how that evolved and changed over time, just even in the sonic quality. I mean, this is 128 bits, this podcast, but if you listen to it in high def glory off the website, you can get it in 24-bit. So let's dive into that. Thanks, you guys, for sharing the record. Thanks for diving into it, however you dive into it, and celebrating our walking this walk together. So you guys keep doing that. Don't take any shit, but when you do it with grace. And I'll share a little bit of Spores here. But thanks. If you want to listen to it in full, it's wherever you listen to music or eastforest.org. you.